The fever had been burning through Willa Everhart's body for 3 days when she stopped being able to lift her head from the pillow. And the only thing standing between her and death was a stubborn cowboy named Nathan Vance, who refused to let her give up. The autumn of 1876 had arrived in Trinity, Texas, with an unexpected fury of illness that swept through the small frontier town like wildfire. What started as a few cases of what folks called the grip had turned into something far more sinister, leaving families devastated and the local doctor overwhelmed. Willa had been helping nurse the sick at the church when she herself fell ill, collapsing in the middle of Main Street with a fever so high it made her delirious. Nathan Vance had been riding into town for supplies when he saw the commotion. A crowd had gathered around a young woman lying in the dust, her auburn hair spread around her like a halo, her face flushed crimson with fever. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground hard as he pushed through the gathering townspeople. The doctor was already there, an elderly man with worry etched deep into his weathered face. "Dr. Morrison, what can we do?" a woman asked frantically. "Get her inside somewhere cool. This fever needs to break or she will not make it through the night," the doctor said grimly. "But I have 6 other patients in the same condition at my office. I cannot give her the constant care she needs." Nathan did not know what possessed him in that moment. He had come to Trinity only a week ago, taking a job at the Broken Arrow Ranch just outside town. He knew nobody here, had no ties, no reason to involve himself in local troubles. But something about the sight of this woman, clearly having spent herself caring for others until her own body gave out, stirred something in his chest. "I will take care of her," Nathan heard himself say. The doctor looked at him with surprise. "Son, you understand what you are offering. This illness requires constant vigilance. She will need to be cooled down regularly, given water and broth whenever she can take it, watched through the night to make sure the fever does not rise too high. It could be days, maybe weeks before she recovers, if she recovers at all." "I understand," Nathan said firmly. "Where should I take her?" A middle-aged woman with kind eyes stepped forward. "I am Margaret Hayes. Willa rents a room above my husband's general store. You can care for her there." "I will help when I can, but I have 3 little ones at home I need to keep away from this sickness." Nathan nodded and carefully lifted Willa from the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and up close he could see how the illness had already ravaged her. Her lips were cracked and dry, her breathing shallow and rapid. Dark circles shadowed her closed eyes, and her skin burned hot even through her clothing. Margaret led him to the general store and up the narrow stairs to a small room with a single window overlooking the street. The room was modest but clean, with an iron frame bed, a washstand, a rocking chair, and a small table. Personal touches spoke of Willa's character. A worn Bible on the table, a sampler with careful stitching hung on the wall that read faith, hope, love, and a photograph in a simple frame showing a younger Willa with an older couple who must have been her parents. "Her parents passed 2 years ago," Margaret said softly, following Nathan's gaze. "Yellow fever took them both within days of each other. Willa came here to start fresh, been working at the schoolhouse teaching the children. She is a good woman, always first to help when anyone needs it." Nathan laid Willa gently on the bed. "I will need clean cloths, cool water, and broth if you have any." Margaret nodded. "I will bring supplies. My husband Henry will help with whatever you need. God bless you for doing this, Mr. Vance, Nathan Vance. God bless you, Mr. Vance. You may have just saved her life." After Margaret left, Nathan pulled the rocking chair close to the bed and began his vigil. He removed his hat and gun belt, rolling up his sleeves as he prepared for the long fight ahead. When Margaret returned with a basin of water and clean cloths, he immediately set to work trying to bring down the fever. He dampened a cloth and pressed it gently to Willa's forehead, then her cheeks, her neck. She stirred slightly at the touch, mumbling words he could not make out. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed with fever, the color a striking green even dulled by illness. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, miss. My name is Nathan. You are sick, but you are going to be all right. I am going to take care of you." But she had already slipped back into unconsciousness, lost in whatever fevered dreams tormented her. That first night was the longest of Nathan's life. He kept the cloths cool and constantly changed them, trying to draw the heat from her body. Her fever spiked twice, climbing so high he feared her brain would cook. During those episodes, she thrashed and cried out, calling for her parents, for people named Sarah and Thomas, for students he assumed she taught. He had to hold her down gently to keep her from hurting herself, speaking to her in low, steady tones even though he doubted she could hear him. "You are strong, Willa Everhart. I can see it in you. You did not give up on those other folks you were helping, so do not give up on yourself now. Come on, fight this." By dawn, the fever had lowered slightly, enough that Nathan allowed himself a moment of hope. Margaret brought hot coffee and fresh broth, along with the news that 2 more people had died in the night. "Doc Morrison says if she makes it through today, her chances improve," Margaret said quietly. "But he also said many who seem to improve suddenly take a turn for the worse. You need to stay vigilant." Nathan had no intention of being anything less. He sent word to the Broken Arrow Ranch that he would not be returning to work for a while, and if they needed to let him go, he understood. To his surprise, the ranch foreman sent back a message saying his job would be waiting and to take whatever time was needed. It seemed even the hardened ranchers of Texas respected a man who honored his word and helped those in need. The pattern established itself quickly. Nathan would sponge Willa down with cool water every hour. He would try to get water past her lips with a dampened cloth she could suck on. He barely slept, catching moments of rest in the rocking chair while keeping one hand on her wrist to monitor her pulse. Margaret brought meals he barely touched, and Henry Hayes, a stocky man with a generous heart, brought whatever supplies Nathan requested without question. On the second day, Willa's fever broke briefly in the afternoon. Her eyes opened, clearer now, and focused on Nathan with confusion. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse and weak. "Nathan Vance. You have been sick. You are in your room above the Hayes store." "I do not remember." She tried to lift her head but could not manage it, the effort leaving her gasping. Why are you here? Someone needed to look after you. Rest now, save your strength. The others, the sick people. Being cared for, you did your part. Now let me do mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "I am so tired." "I know, sleep. I will be right here when you wake up." But when the fever returned that evening, it came back with a vengeance. For 3 more days, Nathan fought alongside Willa against the illness that seemed determined to claim her. He watched her waste away, her cheeks hollowing, her collarbones becoming more prominent. The few times she was conscious enough to speak, she was too weak to do more than whisper. It was on the 5th day that Dr. Morrison visited. He examined Willa thoroughly while Nathan stood by, exhausted and worried. "The fever is lower, but she has no strength," the doctor said gravely. "She needs nourishment, but in this state, she cannot eat solid food. She needs broth as much as she can take several times a day. But she cannot even lift her head on her own." "Then I will lift it for her," Nathan said. "Tell me what to do." Dr. Morrison showed him how to support Willa's head and shoulders, how to tilt her just enough that liquid could go down without choking her. "Start with small amounts. Be patient. If she can take broth regularly, if we can get her strength up even a little, She might turn the corner. After the doctor left, Nathan asked Margaret to make the richest broth she could, with beef and vegetables and whatever else might provide sustenance. When she brought up a steaming pot that afternoon, Nathan set about the delicate task of feeding Willa. He pulled the rocking chair as close to the bed as possible and carefully shifted Willa so her head and shoulders were raised slightly, supported by his left arm and chest. She was limp as a rag doll, unable to help him at all. With his right hand he dipped a spoon into the broth, blew on it gently to cool it, and brought it to her lips. "Come on, Willa, just a little. You need this." Her lips parted slightly and he tipped the spoon, letting a small amount of broth slip into her mouth. She swallowed reflexively, a good sign. Encouraged, he repeated the process. One spoon, then another, then another. It took nearly 30 minutes to get her to take a half cup of broth, but it was progress. "That is good," he murmured. "That is real good. We are going to beat this thing." He repeated the process 3 more times that day, and by evening, Willa's color looked marginally better. That night, her fever stayed low, and Nathan finally allowed himself to sleep for a few hours, slumped in the rocking chair with his long legs stretched out and his head tilted back. He woke to find Willa's eyes open and watching him in the pre-dawn light. "You are still here," she whispered. Nathan straightened, his back protesting the awkward sleeping position. "Told you I would be. How are you feeling?" "Weak. Like I was trampled by horses." Despite himself, Nathan felt a smile tug at his lips. If she could make observations like that, she was definitely improving. "You have been very sick, but you are going to get better. You have been taking care of me." It was not a question. "I remember. Bits and pieces, water, cool cloths, your voice. Someone had to do it. But why you? I do not even know you." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that is exactly why. No history, no obligations, just one person helping another." Willa's eyes studied him, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Even weak and ill, there was intelligence and depth in that green gaze. "I need to give you more broth," Nathan said, deflecting. "Doctor says you need to eat several times a day to get your strength back." Over the next week, feeding Willa became the rhythm of Nathan's days. Every 3 or 4 hours, he would warm the broth Margaret faithfully prepared, and he would carefully support Willa while he spoon-fed her. At first, she could manage only a few spoonfuls before exhaustion overtook her, but gradually, she could take more. A half cup became a full cup, then 2 cups. The intimacy of those moments was not lost on Nathan. He would hold her against his chest, feeling the delicate structure of her bones, the soft weight of her head resting on his shoulder. He could smell the faint lavender scent that clung to her hair despite the illness. Her breath would tickle against his neck as she swallowed each spoonful. Sometimes, when she was particularly weak, broth would dribble from the corner of her mouth and he would gently wipe it away. During those times, they began to talk. At first, just a few words here and there. Willa told him about her students, about the boy who brought her apples, about the girl who struggled with reading but excelled at arithmetic. She spoke of her parents, the pain still fresh even 2 years after their deaths. She talked about how she had come to Trinity hoping to build a new life, to make a difference. Nathan, less accustomed to talking about himself, shared bits of his story. He had been born in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had a small farm, but he had always been restless, drawn to the open range. He had worked on cattle drives, hired his gun out for protection a few times, drifted from town to town looking for something he could not name. "What brought you to Trinity?" Willa asked one afternoon as he fed her chicken broth. The Broken Arrow Ranch was hiring, seemed like a good place to settle for a while. He brought another spoonful to her lips. "Though I have to admit, This was not what I expected to be doing a week after arriving. You could have left, Willa said softly. Any time. Why did you stay? Nathan was quiet, concentrating on the broth for a moment. At first I stayed because I said I would. A man keeps his word. But now. He met her eyes. Now I stay because I want to see you get better, because I admire your strength, because I think maybe I was supposed to ride into Trinity that particular day for a particular reason. A faint flush colored Willa's cheeks, the first real color beyond fever Nathan had seen. I do not know what I would have done without you. I would have died, I think. But you did not. You fought and you are still fighting. That is all you. No, Willa said, her voice firm despite its weakness. That is us. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Us. As if they were a unit now, bound together by this experience. By the 10th day, Willa could lift her head briefly on her own, though the effort still left her trembling. Nathan continued to support her during feedings because it was easier and took less of her energy, but the milestone was significant. Dr. Morrison pronounced her past the worst of it, though he warned that full recovery would take weeks, possibly months. She needs to continue building her strength, the doctor told Nathan. Keep feeding her nourishing food, help her sit up a bit more each day. Eventually, she will need to try standing, walking, but slowly. This illness takes a toll on the body. Nathan nodded, already planning the next steps. Over the following days, he propped Willa up with pillows so she could sit at an angle. He graduated her from broth to soft bread soaked in milk, then to scrambled eggs, then to small pieces of chicken. Each meal, he would sit beside her, sometimes still feeding her when her hands shook too much to manage the spoon herself, sometimes just staying close to encourage her. Margaret and Henry Hayes visited regularly, bringing food and clean linens and offers of help. Other townspeople began stopping by too, Willa's students and their parents, the reverend from the church, families whose sick loved ones Willa had helped nurse before her own illness. They brought gifts, wildflowers, a jar of honey, a fresh baked pie, a knitted shawl. The outpouring of affection for the young schoolteacher was evident, and Nathan realized just how beloved she was in this community. You are an important person here, Nathan observed one evening after a stream of visitors had finally left them in peace. He was helping Willa eat stew, his arm behind her shoulders for support. I just did what anyone would do, Willa protested. No, you did what you thought was right, even knowing the risk. That takes courage. Willa was quiet for a moment, then asked, What will you do? When I am better, I mean. Will you go back to the ranch? The question had been weighing on Nathan's mind too. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since he had worked. His life, such as it was, had narrowed to this small room and the woman in it. The thought of going back to the bunkhouse, to long days in the saddle and nights around a campfire with men he barely knew, held no appeal anymore. I suppose I will, he said finally, unless you are planning to be sick for a while longer. Willa smiled, a real smile that lit up her face and made Nathan's heart do something strange in his chest. I think I have imposed on your kindness long enough, Mr. Vance. Nathan, he corrected. After feeding you 3 times a day for 2 weeks, I think we can dispense with formalities. Then you should call me Willa, though I suppose you have been doing that all along. When you were delirious with fever, you were not in much position to object. They looked at each other, and something shifted in that look. An acknowledgement of what had been building between them during these long days and nights. An awareness that what had started as a simple act of charity had become something far more complicated and precious. On the 14th day, Nathan helped Willa sit fully upright for the first time, her legs over the side of the bed. She was dressed in a fresh nightgown Margaret had brought, her hair brushed and braided. She looked fragile still, but alive in a way she had not 2 weeks ago. I want to try standing, Willa announced. Doc said to take it slow. I am tired of being in this bed, please. Nathan could not refuse the determination in her eyes. He positioned himself in front of her, taking both her hands in his. Lean on me. Put your weight on your legs slowly. Willa nodded and, gripping his hands tightly, began to rise. Her legs shook violently, and she gasped at the effort. Nathan held firm, letting her use him as an anchor. For a moment she was standing, her hands in his, their faces closer than they had been even during all those intimate feeding sessions. I am doing it, she breathed, wonder in her voice. You are doing it, Nathan confirmed, his own voice rough with emotion. She stood for perhaps 30 seconds before her legs gave out. Nathan caught her easily, sweeping her back onto the bed. She was laughing despite the weakness, her face flushed with triumph. That was 3 steps closer to being well, she said. That was a miracle, Nathan replied. You are a wonder, Willa Everhart. The moment stretched between them, charged with feeling neither had voiced but both recognized. Nathan wanted to kiss her, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him. But she was still recovering, still vulnerable, and he would not take advantage of that. So instead, he squeezed her hand and said, Let me get you some supper. I think you have earned something special. Over the next several days, Willa's strength returned in increments. She could stand for longer periods. She could walk a few steps while holding onto Nathan's arm. Her appetite improved dramatically. The fever did not return. Dr. Morrison proclaimed her on the definite path to recovery, and with her recovery came an inevitable question. What happened next? Nathan had returned to work at the Broken Arrow Ranch, taking shifts when he could while still spending his evenings helping Willa. The foreman, a tough but fair man named Dutch Carter, had welcomed him back without complaint and even seemed to respect Nathan more for what he had done. You are a good man, Vance, Dutch said one afternoon as they mended fence. Not many would have done what you did for that schoolteacher. Town is talking about it, talking about both of you. Nathan felt heat rise in his face. People should mind their own business. Dutch chuckled. This is a small town, son. People's business is everyone's business. But do not worry what they are saying is good, saying maybe Trinity has itself a real love story. It is not like that, Nathan protested, but even as he said it, he knew he was lying. It was exactly like that. He was in love with Willa Everhart. Had probably been falling in love with her from that first moment he lifted her from the dusty street. Had certainly been in love by the time he spent those long nights keeping vigil. Had definitely been completely lost by the time he started spoon-feeding her soup and watching life come back into her eyes. The question was what to do about it. That evening, when he arrived at Willa's room with supper, he found her sitting in the rocking chair by the window, fully dressed for the first time in weeks. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was done up properly. She looked beautiful and healthy and completely herself. You are sitting up, Nathan said, pleasure evident in his voice. I have been up most of the day, Willa said proudly. Margaret helped me dress, and I even walked downstairs and back up, slowly and with several rests, but I did it. Nathan set down the tray of food he had brought. That is wonderful. You are getting strong again. Thanks to you. Willa's expression grew serious. Nathan, I need to say something. I have been thinking about how to put this into words, and I am just going to speak plainly. You saved my life. You gave up weeks of your time, your work, probably your pay to take care of a stranger. I can never repay that debt. There is no debt, Nathan said firmly. I did not do it expecting repayment. I know. That is what makes it so extraordinary. Willa stood, walking the few steps to where Nathan stood, close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. But there is something else. These weeks, as I have been getting stronger, I have also been realizing something else was growing. Something I did not expect but cannot deny. Nathan's heart was pounding. Willa, let me finish. She took a breath. I think I am falling in love with you, Nathan Vance. Maybe I already have fallen. I do not know if that is the fever talking or gratitude or something real. But I needed you to know. Even if you do not feel the same, even if you think I am foolish. Nathan reached out and took her hands, the same way he had when he helped her stand that first time. I do not think you are foolish. I think you are the bravest, strongest, most incredible woman I have ever met. And I am completely in love with you too. Have been for a while now, if I am being honest. Willa's smile was radiant. Really, really. But I did not want to say anything while you were sick. Did not want you to feel obligated or confused or think I expected anything because I helped you. I wanted you to be well, to be yourself again, to choose freely. I am choosing you, Willa said simply, if you will have me. Nathan pulled her close, mindful of her still recovering strength, and finally, allowed himself to kiss her. Her lips were soft and warm, and kissing her felt like coming home after a long journey. When they broke apart, both were breathless. I will have you, Nathan murmured against her hair. Now and always, if you will let me. They spent the evening talking about the future, making plans, dreaming together. Nathan was due a visit to the ranch foreman to explain he would be staying in Trinity permanently. Willa needed a few more weeks to fully recover before returning to teaching. There would be a courting period, proper and public, because Willa cared about respectability and Nathan wanted to do right by her. There would be talk, certainly, but the good kind. The kind that ended in wedding bells. The next Sunday, Willa was strong enough to attend church for the first time since her illness. She walked in on Nathan's arm, dressed in her Sunday best, and the entire congregation rose to applaud her recovery. Reverend Thomas spoke movingly about faith and healing, about the power of selfless love and sacrifice. More than one person wiped away tears. After the service, Margaret Hayes embraced Willa tightly. We are so glad to have you back, dear, and we are glad Nathan is staying. How did you know that? Nathan asked. Henry Hayes grinned. Dutch Carter mentioned it at the saloon, said you told him you would not be taking any jobs that required you to leave Trinity. Said you had something more valuable here than wages. Nathan looked at Willa, who was blushing but smiling. That I do. Over the following weeks, Nathan courted Willa properly. He would take her on walks when she was strong enough, short ones at first, then longer as her stamina returned. They would walk along the creek that ran south of town, or down Main Street greeting neighbors, or out to the schoolhouse where Willa would show him her classroom with obvious pride. He brought her wildflowers he picked on the range. She baked him pies and bread on the days when her strength allowed. They attended church socials and town meetings together. They sat on the porch of the general store in the evenings, her in the rocking chair that had become such a symbol of their early time together, him on the steps beside her, talking about everything and nothing. Nathan met Willa's students when they came to visit their recovering teacher. He was gentle with them, answering their questions about being a cowboy, about cattle and horses and life on the range. The children adored him, especially when he taught them to rope a fence post using his lasso. Willa visited Nathan at the Broken Arrow Ranch one Sunday afternoon. She met his fellow ranch hands, saw the vast Texas landscape where he worked, rode beside him on a gentle mare named Daisy. He showed her the herd, explained the work, talked about his dreams of maybe one day having his own small ranch, nothing grand, just enough to make a living and raise a family. A family? Willa asked, her eyes bright with interest. Nathan pulled his horse to a stop on a rise overlooking miles of grassland. If I am lucky enough to find someone who wants to build that life with me. I think you might have found her, Willa said softly. 3 months after the day Willa collapsed in the street, Nathan proposed. He did it simply, without fanfare, in the room where he had nursed her back to health. It seemed fitting somehow to ask her in the place where their story had truly begun. Willa Everhart, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You have changed my life in ways I cannot even fully explain. I was drifting before I met you, no purpose, no direction. Now I know exactly where I want to be, and it is wherever you are. Will you marry me? Willa did not hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married in the Trinity Church on a crisp November morning in 1876, exactly 1 year to the day after Nathan had first ridden into town. The entire community turned out for the celebration. Willa wore a simple white dress that Margaret Hayes and some of the other women had sewn together. Nathan wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his boots polished to a shine. Reverend Thomas officiated, speaking about the mysterious ways the Lord worked, about how sometimes the greatest blessings came from the darkest trials. When Nathan kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the Hayes General Store, the space transformed with decorations and tables laden with food the whole town had contributed to. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy. Dutch Carter gave a speech about how Nathan was the best cowhand he had ever known, and how he was gaining an even better daughter in Willa. Margaret Hayes cried happy tears and hugged them both so tightly they could barely breathe. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Nathan and Willa walked to their new home, a small house on the edge of town that Nathan had purchased with his savings and fixed up over the past months. It was modest but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting area, and a porch where they could watch the sun set over the Texas prairie. Home, Willa said wonderingly as Nathan carried her over the threshold. Our home. Our home, Nathan confirmed, setting her down gently and pulling her close. The first of many firsts for us. They built a beautiful life together in Trinity. Nathan continued working at the Broken Arrow Ranch, eventually becoming foreman when Dutch Carter retired. Willa returned to teaching, beloved by students and parents alike. They were active in church, in community affairs, in the daily rhythms of small-town Texas life. Their first child, a son they named Noah William Vance, arrived in the fall of 1877. Nathan was absolutely smitten from the moment he held the tiny baby, and Willa fell even more in love with her husband watching him cradle their son with such tenderness. Noah had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and he grew up strong and curious. A daughter followed 2 years later, Emma Grace Vance, with auburn hair like her mother and her father's quiet determination. Then another son, Thomas James Vance, named for Willa's father, who arrived in 1881. Their house rang with laughter and occasional squabbles, with bedtime stories and morning prayers, with all the beautiful chaos of family life. Nathan proved to be an exceptional father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught his children to ride, to rope, to respect the land and the animals in their care. Willa taught them to read and write, to think critically, to care for those less fortunate. Together, they raised their children with love and faith and strong values. In 1884, Nathan realized his dream of owning his own small ranch. With savings and a loan from the bank, he purchased 100 acres adjacent to the Broken Arrow. It was not large by Texas standards, but it was theirs. They built a bigger house there, with room for their growing family and visitors. They ran cattle and horses, and the operation was successful enough to provide comfortable living. Willa continued teaching part-time, though she also took on the significant work of managing the household and raising their children. In her spare moments, she wrote letters to her former students who had moved away, maintained the family Bible with careful records of births and deaths and marriages, and volunteered at the church, helping new families get established in Trinity. The years passed with the kind of quiet happiness that does not make for dramatic stories, but makes for beautiful lives. There were challenges, certainly. A drought one year that nearly broke them financially. Illness that swept through and took young Emma for a terrifying week before she recovered. The usual struggles of raising children and managing a ranch and maintaining a marriage. But through it all, Nathan and Willa faced everything together. They never forgot where they started, in that small room above the general store where Nathan had spoon-fed Willa soup for 2 weeks while fighting to keep her alive. That experience had forged a bond between them that could weather any storm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to that room, now used for storage by the Hayes family. They stood in the space where their love story had begun, holding hands and remembering. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it has been 10 years, Willa said softly. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." Nathan pulled her close. "I would do it all again, every moment, every spoonful of soup, every worry-filled night, all of it to end up here with you." "You saved my life," Willa said, something she had said countless times over the years but still said with wonder. "No," Nathan corrected gently, as he always did. "We saved each other." They stood together in that small room as the afternoon light slanted through the window. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and had built something lasting and true. Their children grew. Noah became a rancher like his father, taking over more of the daily operations as Nathan got older. Emma became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over Willa's position at the Trinity schoolhouse. Thomas headed west to California, seeking adventure and opportunity, but wrote home regularly and visited when he could. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with new generations of noise and joy. Nathan would sit on the porch in the evening, watching his grandchildren play in the yard, and feel a profound sense of gratitude for the life he had been given. Willa would join him, her hand seeking his automatically, and they would watch the sunset together in comfortable silence. The town of Trinity grew and prospered over the years. New businesses opened. The railroad came through in 1889, bringing new opportunities and connecting the town to the wider world. But the heart of the community remained its people, and Nathan and Willa Vance were pillars of that community. They were known for their generosity, their kindness, their willingness to help neighbors in need. When the Hopkins family lost their barn to fire, Nathan organized the men to rebuild it. When the schoolhouse needed a new roof, Willa organized fundraising that brought in enough money for repairs and new books too. When drought struck in the 1890s, they were among the first to share their well water with struggling neighbors. In 1901, 25 years after their wedding, Trinity threw Nathan and Willa a celebration. The entire town turned out to honor the couple who had become such an integral part of their community. There were speeches and gifts, music and dancing, and a beautiful cake that Margaret Hayes' daughter had baked using her mother's recipe. Nathan and Willa stood before their friends and neighbors, older now but still deeply in love, still holding hands, still the same two people who had found each other in the midst of crisis and turned it into lasting joy. "I never imagined," Willa said when called upon to speak, "when I woke up in that room all those years ago to find a stranger caring for me, that it would lead to this. To all of you, to this community, to the beautiful life I have been privileged to live." Nathan Vance rode into Trinity on what seemed like an ordinary day, but it changed everything. It changed me. It gave me not just my life back, but a reason to live it fully. And for that, I will be grateful every day I have left on this earth. Nathan, never comfortable with public speaking, kept his words simple. Willa is my heart, has been since the day I met her, will be until the day I die. Everything good in my life comes from her and flows from that moment when I chose to stay. Best decision I ever made. The crowd erupted in applause and more than a few tears. The celebration went on late into the night, full of laughter and reminiscence and love. As Nathan and Willa finally returned home, walking slowly through the quiet streets of Trinity, Willa said, "Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If you had ridden into town a day earlier or later, if you had not stopped when you saw me." "I try not to," Nathan admitted. "Because thinking about losing you, even a version of you I never knew, is too painful. I would rather focus on what we have, what we built, what we are still building." 25 years, Willa marveled, "and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day." "That is because you did not know how annoying I could be back then," Nathan teased. Willa laughed and swatted his arm gently. "You are not annoying. You are perfect. Now I know you are lying." But they were both laughing now, the easy laughter of people completely comfortable with each other, who knew each other's flaws and loved each other anyway. They lived many more good years together. Their children had children who had children. The Vance name became synonymous with integrity and hard work in Trinity and throughout the region. The ranch prospered and was passed down through generations. The schoolhouse continued to educate children, many taught by Emma and eventually by Emma's own daughter. Nathan lived to be 76 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1921 with Willa beside him. His last words to her were, "Thank you for letting me love you." Willa lived 3 more years, long enough to see women gain the right to vote, long enough to see automobiles become common on the streets of Trinity, long enough to see the world change in ways she could never have imagined as a young woman. But through all those changes, one thing remained constant: her love for Nathan Vance. When Willa passed in the spring of 1924, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last words were about Nathan. "He fed me soup," she said with a smile, her mind perhaps back in that little room in 1876. 2 weeks, every day, such a good man. They were buried side by side in the Trinity Cemetery, beneath twin headstones that read simply, Nathan Vance, 1845–1921. Beloved husband, father, and friend Willa Everhart Vance, 1851–1924. Beloved wife, mother, and teacher, but their real memorial was not in stone. It was in the family they created, the community they served, the love story they lived. For years after, people in Trinity would tell the tale of the cowboy who saved the schoolteacher, who nursed her back to health, who spoon-fed her soup for 2 weeks while she was too weak to lift her head from the pillow. And they would tell how that simple act of compassion and commitment had blossomed into one of the great love stories of Trinity, Texas. Young couples would visit the cemetery and stand before their graves, holding hands and hoping their own love could be even a fraction as strong, as lasting, as true. The story was passed down through generations, embellished perhaps in some details, but accurate in the ones that mattered. That Nathan Vance had chosen love when he could have walked away, that Willa Everhart had fought to live when death would have been easier, and that together they had built something beautiful and lasting. The little room above what had been the Hayes General Store, now occupied by a dress shop run by one of Emma's granddaughters, became a piece of Trinity history. A small plaque was installed outside it, Reading. In this room in 1876, Nathan Vance nursed Willa Everhart through illness, beginning a love story that helped build this community. Tourists visiting Trinity would often ask to see the room, and the current owner would graciously allow them to peek inside. It looked nothing like it had in 1876, of course. But if you stood there quietly, if you let your imagination run, you could almost see them. A tall, lean cowboy with dark hair and kind eyes, sitting in a rocking chair pulled close to the bed, patiently spoon-feeding broth to a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes who was fighting for her life. You could almost hear his low voice encouraging her. "Just a little more. You can do this. I am right here. I am not going anywhere." You could almost feel the tenderness in the way he supported her head, the care he took to make sure she did not choke, the gentleness of his touch as he wiped broth from her lips. And if you were particularly imaginative, you could see the moment when their eyes met and something shifted. When compassion became affection, became love. When two people who had been strangers just weeks before realized they were meant to spend their lives together. That was the magic of Nathan and Willa's story. It reminded people that love could come from the most unexpected places and the most difficult circumstances. That choosing to care for someone, even when it was hard and costly and inconvenient, could lead to the greatest blessings. That sometimes the best things in life came not from grand gestures, but from quiet, consistent, everyday acts of love and sacrifice. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in and around Trinity as the 20th century progressed. They carried the Vance name and the values Nathan and Willa had instilled. They knew the story of how their ancestors met, knew it as well as they knew their own names. It was part of their identity, part of their heritage. And every now and then, when life got difficult or love seemed complicated or the world felt too hard, they would remember Nathan sitting in that rocking chair, patiently feeding Willa soup spoonful by spoonful, hour after hour, day after day, refusing to give up on her. They would remember that real love was not just passion and romance, though Nathan and Willa had certainly had that. Real love was also commitment and patience, and showing up even when it was hard. Real love was 2 weeks of spoon-feeding soup to someone too weak to lift her head from the pillow. Real love was choosing to stay, and in remembering, they would find strength to love their own partners better, to commit more fully, to show up more consistently. The legacy Nathan and Willa left was not just in the children they bore or the ranch they built, or the contributions they made to Trinity. It was in the example they set of what love could be when two people decided to put each other first, to weather storms together, to build something lasting and true. That was the real story of Nathan Vance and Willa Everhart, not just a tale of illness and recovery, though that was how it started. Not just a romance, though it certainly was that, but a testament to the power of choosing love day after day, spoonful by spoonful, moment by moment. And that story, told and retold across generations in Trinity, Texas, reminded people of something important, that heroism was not always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes heroism was sitting in a rocking chair all night to make sure someone's fever did not spike. Sometimes heroism was feeding someone soup when they could not feed themselves. Sometimes heroism was simply refusing to give up on someone, refusing to walk away, refusing to take the easy path. Nathan Vance had been a hero, not because he was a cowboy who could ride and rope and shoot, though he could do all those things. He was a hero because when he saw someone in need, he stopped. He stayed. He cared. And in doing so, he not only saved a life, but created a love story that would inspire people for generations to come. Willa Everhart had been a hero too, Not because she was a teacher or a community volunteer or a good mother, though she was all those things. She was a hero because she fought to live when dying would have been easier, because she opened her heart to love when she was at her most vulnerable, because she chose to build a life and a family and a legacy with a man who had been a stranger but became her everything. Together, they showed Trinity and everyone who heard their story what was possible when two people committed to loving each other through everything. The good times and the bad, the sickness and the health. The times when love was easy, and the times when it required every ounce of strength and patience they possessed. And in the end, that was perhaps the most beautiful part of their story. Not the dramatic beginning with the collapse in the street and the desperate fight for survival. Not even the romantic middle with the courtship and the wedding and the building of a family. But the long, full life they lived together afterwards. The decades of choosing each other. The ordinary moments that made up an extraordinary love. That was what people remembered when they thought of Nathan and Willa Vance. Not just the soup and the spoon and the 2 weeks of nursing, but the 50 years that followed. The laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the deep abiding love that carried them through everything life threw at them. And so their story lived on in Trinity, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, told at weddings and anniversaries, invoked whenever someone needed a reminder of what real love looked like. It became part of the town's identity, a piece of its history, a source of pride and inspiration. The cowboy and the schoolteacher, the 2 weeks of soup, the love that bloomed from crisis and grew into something that lasted lifetimes and shaped generations. That was the story of Nathan Vance and Willa Everhart, and it was a story worth telling.